Hello, family. Enjoy this great and beautiful moment with Afri Stories. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and comment. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones. And don't miss future videos from us. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Daniel Turner often described his life with Sophia as a dream come true, a love story so seamless it felt too good to be real. Their friends teased that they were the poster couple for romance, always smiling, holding hands, and finishing each other's sentences. From the very beginning, it seemed as though fate had taken special care to weave their paths together. They met in college. He was studying architecture. She was diving into interior design. Their projects aligned during a campus showcase. Sophia, enthusiastic and bright, introduced herself by praising Daniel's ability to create living spaces that exuded warmth. He'd blushed, unaccustomed to such genuine admiration. By the end of that conversation, they had exchanged numbers. The rest, as they say, was history. 6 years into their marriage, the two had built an existence around trust, laughter, and unwavering support. Whenever Daniel got bogged down with clients who nitpicked every blueprint, Sophia would calm him with the gentlest words. "You're talented," she would remind him, resting a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." He adored her for that. In her presence, he felt capable, important, loved. With her, every defeat seemed conquerable, and every triumph felt sweeter. They had their routines, like Sunday brunches at their favorite cafe and spontaneous kitchen dance parties while waiting for pasta to boil. Their inside jokes piled up into an encyclopedia of shared laughter, and the memories they created painted the walls of their cozy suburban home. Life was good, yet, in quiet moments, Daniel would catch a flicker of worry in Sophia's eyes, like she was shouldering a burden she wouldn't name. He'd ask if everything was okay. She'd smile quickly, answering yes, almost too quickly. At first, he dismissed it. Maybe she was just exhausted from her design firm's new projects. Maybe she was juggling a surprise for him. She loved planning birthdays and holiday getaways. But then the changes grew more unsettling. She started receiving late-night calls on her cell phone. Every time it rang, she would slip into another room, pressing the phone close to her ear so he couldn't overhear. And when he'd ask whom she'd been talking to, she'd wave it off. A colleague or just a client, followed by an abrupt change of topic. One rainy afternoon, Daniel stood at the window, watching water streak down the glass. Sophia was supposed to meet him for lunch, but she had texted last minute, apologizing that something urgent came up. Staring at the gray sky, Daniel's stomach twisted into anxious knots. This wasn't the Sophia he knew. She used to be open and eager to share every detail of her day. Now, she was distant, preoccupied, and strangely guarded. Despite these red flags, Daniel tried to chalk it up to stress. The thought of his wife lying to him seemed incomprehensible. "We trust each other," he told himself in the mirror one morning. "We've always been honest." But a quiet voice in the back of his mind whispered doubt. Could something else be going on? He forced a reassuring smile, hoping it would drown out the unease gnawing at his heart. Things escalated further when Daniel noticed Sophia's phone was constantly set to silent. One evening, while they watched a movie, he saw a call come in. Unknown number, silent vibrate. Immediately declined. She excused herself, retreating to the bedroom. He paused the movie, listened to her hushed voice through the closed door. When she came out again, her face looked flushed, and she clung to a forced smile. "Work emergency," she claimed. He nodded, but something felt terribly off. Tension thickened between them like a fog. Their once vibrant and easy conversations now felt carefully curated, each holding back questions and fears. Daniel found himself replaying small moments in his mind. The time she'd stepped outside for a call or quickly hung up when he walked in. Each memory fed his suspicion. To distract himself, he threw energy into his architectural projects. He worked late, took on extra clients, anything to avoid confronting his deepening fears. Then came the day that changed everything. He was driving home, the evening sun casting long shadows across the road. As he stopped at a red light near the town's upscale bistro, he caught sight of Sophia through the glass window. She sat at a table with a tall, well-dressed man who spoke animatedly, leaning in close. She laughed, really laughed, the way she once used to do with him. Daniel's grip on the steering wheel tightened. His mind raced, heart pounding as the light turned green. He kept his gaze locked on the scene, the stranger's hand briefly touching Sophia's arm. An indescribable wave of fear and jealousy erupted inside him. That night, he said nothing. He pretended he had worked late, but he couldn't shake the image of Sophia smiling at another man. Had she drifted so far that she was now sharing intimate moments with someone else? The possibility sliced through him. He watched her sleep, the soft rise and fall of her breath, feeling both anger and heartbreak tangling in his chest. By dawn, a single question plagued him. Who was that man, and why did she seem happier with him than she had in months at home? Daniel woke up with a heavy heart. The memory of seeing Sophia in that dimly lit restaurant replaying like an unwanted movie trailer in his mind. It gnawed at him, morphing into a persistent ache he couldn't ignore. Even as Sophia handed him his coffee that morning, looking a bit tired but smiling softly, he couldn't help but picture the way she had laughed with that stranger. The incongruity felt like a betrayal wrapped in confusion. In the past, he would have confronted her directly, but something about the tension in her eyes made him hesitate. If she was hiding something, would she be honest if he asked? The seed of mistrust was firmly planted now. Daniel felt guilty for not trusting her, yet he couldn't dismiss the image of her leaning in toward that man. The coffee tasted bitter, matching his mood. After a restless day at work, Daniel decided he needed answers. He left the office early and circled back to the bistro where he'd seen her. No sign of Sophia there. So he drove around for a while, unsure of what he was even looking for. His mind played tricks on him. Every brunette he spotted on the sidewalk made his heart jump, only to discover it wasn't her. By the time he returned home, he was emotionally drained, consumed by the possibility of betrayal. That night, as they prepared dinner, he tried to start a conversation. "How was your day?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. "It was fine," Sophia replied, carefully chopping vegetables, busy with a new design concept. "You know how it goes." Her tone was polite, but her eyes didn't meet his. He inched closer. "Did you go anywhere special? Maybe see anyone for lunch?" She paused for just a moment, and something flickered across her face before she answered. "No, just the usual routine," she said, forcing a smile. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged, trying to seem casual, just curious. But the doubt was there, lodged in his throat. He felt like he was dancing around an enormous pit of quicksand, afraid that one wrong move would suck him in completely. The next day, he couldn't shake his suspicion. Determined to discover the truth, he began to watch her closely. Whenever Sophia said she was going out, he took note of the time, the outfit she chose, the perfume she wore. Sometimes she came back smelling faintly of a cologne that wasn't his. When he checked her receipts or asked about her whereabouts, she offered vague explanations or dismissive answers that made little sense. One particularly tense evening, he caught her texting someone while she thought he was showering. He hadn't heard the phone ring. Why was she checking it? From a crack in the bathroom door, he saw her tap out a message, expression tense, then swiftly delete the conversation. Fear turned his stomach. This was more than a misunderstanding. She was hiding something, and she was methodical about it. As the days turned into a week, Daniel found himself unable to focus on his architectural designs. At night, instead of sleeping, he stared at the ceiling, replaying every odd moment. The more he observed, the more suspicious he became. But a small part of him still clung to the hope that there was a perfectly reasonable explanation, perhaps a work-related secret or a side project she felt insecure about. Yet, the flashes of paranoia kept returning, especially after he discovered she was frequently visiting a part of town known for high-end hotels and luxury bars. One late afternoon, his curiosity consumed him. He decided to quietly follow her car. He felt guilty, like he was violating the very foundation of their marriage, but he justified it by telling himself he needed the truth. Keeping a safe distance, he trailed her through the city. His stomach churned when she turned into the parking lot of a lavish, upscale hotel. She stepped out her car, phone pressed to her ear, her posture tense. Moments later, that same tall, well-dressed man from the bistro came into view. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. They exchanged a few words in the lobby, then disappeared inside. Daniel parked, feeling equal parts furious and devastated. This hotel wasn't just any place. It was known for hosting private events and extended stay guests. Could this be an affair? The scenario played out in his mind like a tragic film. What if she was meeting him in a suite upstairs? What if they had been carrying on for months? The betrayal stung worse than any wound he had known. He waited nearly an hour, warring with himself about barging in, catching them red-handed. But fear paralyzed him. A million memories rushed in. Sophia laughing at his jokes, comforting him during his worst failures, planning the perfect surprise parties. Could she really be throwing all that away? When he finally saw them exit the hotel, they appeared to be in a serious discussion rather than a romantic embrace. Still, the tension in Daniel's chest didn't ease. He went home, uncertain, hurt. The next day, he couldn't bear to keep this inside any longer. He confronted her in the living room, anger brimming in his voice. "I know you're lying about where you go. I saw you at that hotel with another man." Sophia's eyes widened, and for a moment, he thought he saw fear or maybe guilt. "Daniel, she began, but she didn't finish. Whatever excuse she prepared seemed stuck in her throat. That silence only confirmed his worst suspicions. The evening air felt thick with tension when Daniel finally stormed out of the house, slamming the front door behind him. He paced on the porch, hands trembling, breath uneven. He needed answers. Yet every time he pressed Sophia, she either clammed up or offered half-truths that didn't match what he'd witnessed. The memory of seeing her with that man in the hotel lobby kept replaying in his mind, fueling an anger that both terrified and emboldened him. He marched back inside, determined to get clarity. He found Sophia in the living room, tears glistening on her cheeks. Her eyes pleaded for understanding, but she said nothing to fill the suffocating silence. "How could you do this?" Daniel finally demanded, voice cracking. "I saw you with him. I followed you, Sophia. You've been lying to me for weeks." She swallowed hard, words stumbling on her lips. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" he interrupted, almost shouting. "What reason could you possibly have for sneaking around with him, meeting at a hotel, lying about your whereabouts? Do you know what that looks like to me?" She took a trembling breath, clearly torn about what to say. I can't explain right now," she whispered, tears streaking down her face. Daniel let out a hollow laugh, heartbreak searing his chest. "You can't explain? We're married, Sophia. We share everything. At least, I thought we did." He paused, seeing her struggle to speak, then added quietly, "What happened to us?" She looked away, tears falling onto her blouse. But still no explanation came. Instead, she just shook her head, as though resigned to let him think the worst. Numbness washed over him. He turned, grabbed his coat, and headed to the bedroom to pack a bag. He could hear her following him, her voice quivering as she pleaded, "Daniel, please don't go. Just give me a little more time. I promise I can explain." He spun around, eyes flashing with hurt. "Time? For what?" "Another secret meeting." His voice cracked with pain. "I refuse to live like this, Sophia. This marriage is built on trust, and you've shattered it." For a moment, she looked ready to confess something, mouth opening and closing before she spoke. But in the end, she just bowed her head. That was all he needed to see. The weight of betrayal pressed down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He zipped his suitcase shut, ignoring her soft sobs. Half an hour later, Daniel backed his car out of the driveway. He felt a twisting ache in his gut, the heartbreak almost physical. He wasn't just leaving the house. He was leaving behind the life he thought was perfect. The sky was dark, clouds covering the moon as though reflecting the turmoil in his mind. He tried to focus on the road, yet images of Sophia's tear-streaked face haunted him. He checked into a budget motel that night, ignoring the concerned text from his sister and best friend. Word traveled fast, apparently, and he wasn't ready to explain the fiasco. The room was a far cry from the comfort home. Dim lights, scratchy sheets, musty smell, but it matched the emotional state he was in, dreary, cold, and full of regrets. Over the next few days, He buried himself in work. He'd leave the motel at dawn, return late at night, and avoid all thoughts of Sophia. But it was futile. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, remembered the way she used to look at him with unwavering love. His phone buzzed countless times, calls, voicemails, and text messages from her. Each one remained unanswered. He was too angry and too broken to entertain her attempts at reconciliation. "I trusted you," he muttered into the darkness each night, staring at the peeling wallpaper. "You were my everything, and you ruined it." Yet, despite the anger, a part of him still yearned for an explanation. Had he been too quick to assume the worst? The pain felt raw, but doubt gnawed at him, too. Could there be a logical reason for her secrets? He shoved the thought away, reminded himself of those images. The hotel, the intimate laughter, her defensive silence. By the end of the week, his bitterness was like armor. He convinced himself the marriage was irreparably broken. "There's no coming back from this," he told himself. She betrayed me. So he ignored her calls, let her texts pile up. He even considered blocking her number, but something stopped him each time. Maybe that faint, desperate hope that she'd finally confess or that he'd find closure. One night, after too many cups of black coffee and staring at incomplete design sketches, Daniel collapsed onto motel bed. His phone buzzed again, an unknown number lighting the screen. Normally, he would ignore it, but something compelled him to answer this time. "Hello?" he said, exhaustion evident in his voice. "Mr. Turner? This is Dr. Harris." A calm, concerned voice replied. "I've been trying to reach your wife for some time now. My apologies for calling you directly." Daniel frowned, the name unfamiliar. "Dr. Harris? Is there something wrong?" A pause, then a measured response. "I'm afraid it's urgent. May I ask, have you spoken with Sophia recently?" His pulse quickened. "No. What does this have to do with her?" "Actually, sir, it concerns you," Dr. Harris said, choosing his words carefully. "She's been in close contact with our medical team regarding a life-threatening condition that you might not be aware of. We need you to come to the hospital as soon as possible." Daniel's mind reeled. What was he talking about? A life-threatening condition? Before he could form another question, Dr. Harris added gently, "I believe Sophia has been searching for a suitable donor for you, Mr. Turner. Please come in. Time may be running short." Daniel stared at his phone for a long minute, unable to process Dr. Harris's words. A life-threatening condition? Donor? None of it made sense. He recalled his routine checkups, basic physicals, minor colds. Had there been something more? A diagnosis he'd overlooked? The idea that Sophia might have known about a serious illness. He didn't even realize he had seemed surreal. His fingers trembled as he dialed the hospital's number, following up to confirm the details. The operator transferred him to Dr. Harris, who quickly outlined the situation. Daniel had a rare heart condition that required a transplant. Sophia had been liaising with specialists and potential donors, fervently seeking solutions before it became too late. She had hoped to secure everything without alarming him, Dr. Harris explained, wanting to protect him from the stress. Shock left Daniel momentarily speechless. The lies, the secrecy, the mysterious hotel visits. They weren't evidence of a sordid affair at all. They were part of a frantic mission to save his life. Guilt and confusion crashed over him like a tidal wave. He felt sick, remembering all the times he accused her, the vile things he'd thought. She hadn't been cheating. She'd been fighting for him. He managed to find his voice. "How? How serious is this condition, doctor?" Dr. Harris sighed, a hint of sympathy in his tone. "I'm afraid it's progressed quickly. The type of heart disease you have can deteriorate unexpectedly. Sophia has been in contact with a renowned specialist, Dr. Montgomery, who's been staying at the Grandwood Hotel for a medical conference. That's likely where she met him. We've been trying to finalize a plan, but we needed your most recent test results. Unfortunately, without Sophia's full cooperation or your presence, we're at a standstill." Daniel hung up, his mind spinning. The same hotel he'd seen her enter. That was where Dr. Montgomery had been staying. Could the tall, well-dressed man be the specialist? Suddenly, the memories replayed with painful clarity. Sophia's forced smiles, the late-night calls, the perfume. Maybe it belonged to another person in the hospital corridors or Dr. Montgomery himself. Every suspicious puzzle piece fell into place, revealing not betrayal but sacrifice. He felt nauseous at how quickly he had judged her, how decisively he'd slammed the door on their marriage. His body moved on autopilot as he gathered his belongings from the motel, tossed them into the car, and sped toward the hospital. When he arrived, Dr. Harris led him down a bright hallway, explaining the urgency of the situation. They reached a glass-walled office, where a few staff members were sorting medical records. Daniel's eyes scanned the room, seeking Sophia's face. She wasn't there. Noticing his distress, Dr. Harris offered a gentle pat on his shoulder. "She came by earlier, but we've lost contact since last week," he explained. "We tried calling her, but she hasn't returned our calls." Daniel's heart thudded. I left her," he admitted in a shaky whisper. "I thought—" He trailed off, feeling tears prick his eyes. He didn't want to finish that sentence, to admit how terribly wrong he had been. Despite the chaos, Dr. Harris led Daniel through a whirlwind of tests. Blood samples, echocardiograms, more consultations. Daniel felt numb, as if he were floating outside his own body. The word heart failure and transplant buzzed in his ears. Between exams, he scrolled through his phone, checking Sophia's texts, reading her last messages. They were full of concern, hints of confusion, and repeated pleas. "Please trust me. I'm doing this for us. I need you to be patient." He slammed his eyes shut, wishing he could rewind time. Hours later, he stepped out of the testing room. Dr. Harris had arranged a meeting with Dr. Montgomery. When Daniel entered the small conference area, he recognized him immediately as the man from the bistro and the hotel. Tall, polished, concerned expression. The same man Daniel had resented, cursed in his mind as a homewrecker. "Mr. Turner, I'm Dr. Montgomery," he greeted, extending a hand. "I've been working with your wife for the past couple of months. She's been tireless in trying to find a donor match. The condition is serious, and we need to move quickly if you have a chance at a healthy future." Daniel shook his hand numbly, swallowing the bitterness in his throat. "Thank you," he managed, voice barely above a whisper. I owe you an apology. I misunderstood everything." The doctor gave a small nod, compassion in his eyes. "Sophia never once mentioned anything about your marriage being in trouble. She was fully focused on your survival. You'll need to follow up with her to finalize the next steps." After discussing potential donors and the preliminary timelines, Daniel realized how precarious his situation was. They needed to confirm a match soon, or the chances of a successful transplant would drop. Once again, guilt weighed on him. Sophia had been racing the clock, likely burdened by fear of losing him. Yet he had stormed out, leaving her alone with that burden. He hurried out of the hospital, phone clutched in his hand. He tried calling Sophia, desperate to hear her voice, but each ring ended in voicemail. The sense of dread intensified. Where was she? Why wasn't she answering? Driving back to their home, he felt like every red light lasted an eternity. Every slow car was an obstacle prolonging his torment. By the time he finally pulled into their driveway, dusk was settling. The house stood dark and silent. He rushed inside, calling her name, flipping on lights. Empty rooms. The bedroom closet door was ajar, and her clothes were still hanging there, but he noticed a single suitcase missing. Panic set in. Had she left town? Was she so hurt by his accusations that she fled? Daniel slumped onto the couch, head in his hands. Everything he had believed was a lie, only it was his own false assumption, not hers. He needed to find her, beg for forgiveness, and cling to whatever time he had left. He searched every corner of the house, hoping Sophia might be in a room he'd overlooked. He peered into the garage. Her car was gone. The stillness felt oppressive, wrapping around him like a blanket of regret. Memories assailed him. The joyful laughter they once shared, the supportive embraces, the way she'd study his face as if he were the most important person in the world. He sank onto their living room couch, where they had spent countless evenings watching movies and talking about the future. Now he was alone, consumed by the realization that his wife had been sacrificing everything to secure his survival. Anger at himself flared again. How could he have doubted her? Pulling out his phone, he scrolled to the last text message she had sent days ago. I love you, Daniel. No matter what happens. He read it repeatedly, tears sliding down his cheeks. He dialed her number again, praying she'd answer. Once more it went to voicemail. In desperation, he started calling her close friends. Most hadn't heard from her. A few knew she'd been upset, but had no details. It was as though Sophia had disappeared into thin air. Daniel tried her parents, who lived 3 states away. Her mother answered, worry thick in her voice. We haven't heard from her in weeks, Daniel. Is everything okay? He couldn't bring himself to explain, so he mumbled a reassurance and ended the call. That night he barely slept. His heart condition loomed in his mind, each beat a reminder of time slipping away. But his greatest fear wasn't even his own mortality anymore. It was that he'd pushed Sophia too far away, that he'd wounded her so deeply she might never return. At dawn, he decided to search the hospital again, hoping maybe she'd come back to check on the donor situation. When he arrived, he found Dr. Harris in the hallway. Have you heard from my wife? He asked, voice tense with dread. The doctor shook his head gravely. No, Mr. Turner, and we do need her input. She's the one who was coordinating most of this. Without her, we're stuck in administrative limbo. Daniel's chest tightened. What about the donor search? Is there anything I can do? Dr. Harris guided him into his office. Sophia had been reaching out to multiple donor registries and contacting specialists nationwide. She made significant progress, even finding a potential match, but nothing was concrete yet. We need final confirmations, new tests. There's a mountain of paperwork. He paused, seeing the desperation in Daniel's eyes. I'm sorry. I wish I had better news. Sighing heavily, Daniel left the office. He felt more certain than ever that he had to find Sophia. Without her, not only was his life in jeopardy, she was the key to connecting all the dots. The idea that she'd gone silent after everything she had done to help him terrified him. What if she was in trouble? Returning to his car, he remembered the hotel she'd visited. Perhaps the specialist, Dr. Montgomery, knew something more. He rushed there, heart pounding, ignoring the fact that it was still early morning. He found Dr. Montgomery in a conference room, reviewing medical notes before his next seminar. Dr. Montgomery, Daniel said breathlessly, I need your help. I can't get in touch with Sophia. Did she say anything to you about where she might go? The doctor sighed, setting down his notepad. She called me a couple of days ago, distraught, saying that you'd left. She was worried you'd never speak to her again. He gestured for Daniel to take a seat. She asked if we could handle the arrangements without involving you too much, to spare you stress. But that's all. We mostly talked about finalizing the donor search. Daniel rubbed a hand over his face. I have to find her. I was so wrong about everything. Dr. Montgomery regarded him sympathetically. She might just need time, Daniel. She's been under immense pressure. You should check places that might give her peace, somewhere she goes to think or reflect. That sparked a memory, a small lake an hour away from town, where they'd often go for picnics. Sophia used to call it her thinking spot, a tranquil refuge by the water's edge. Without wasting a moment, Daniel headed there, driving as fast as he dared. The late morning sun glinted off the surface of the lake when he arrived. At first glance, it seemed deserted, but as he approached the shoreline, he spotted her car parked beneath a willow tree. His chest constricted with both relief and apprehension. Taking a deep breath, he walked along the grassy bank, scanning for any sign of her. He found Sophia sitting on a large rock, gazing at the rippling water. Her hair caught the sunlight, and she looked so fragile. Quietly, he drew close, the crunch of gravel under his shoes announcing his presence. She turned, eyes widening when she saw him. Instantly, tears welled up. Daniel, she whispered, voice trembling. He knelt beside her on the grass. The gentle lap of water against the shore filled the silence for a moment. Sophia, I'm so sorry, he said, fighting back his own tears. I was an idiot. I saw you with Dr. Montgomery and assumed the worst. I never gave you a chance to explain. Her lower lip quivered, tears spilling down her cheeks. You left. she choked out, voice tight with pain. I tried to tell you, but you never gave me the chance. I thought I could save you without burdening you with worry. She pressed a hand to her chest. I didn't want you to feel sick, to be stressed. I wanted to handle it behind the scenes, so you could live normally. Daniel's eyes burned with tears. I know. I found out from Dr. Harris. I'm sorry I doubted you. His words rushed out, filled with regret. I can't believe what you've done for me, how selfless you've been. Sophia shut her eyes, unable to speak for a moment. The wind rustled the leaves overhead. Finally, she whispered, Is it too late for us? He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. I hope not, because I need you. I need to fix this, and I need to fight for us. They sat together by the lake, their hands intertwined, the silence between them finally warm instead of cold. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt the tension begin to ease, replaced by a resolve to make things right. He drew Sophia into a gentle embrace, pressing his forehead against hers. They stayed like that, letting their hearts speak in the unspoken language of love and forgiveness. Eventually, Sophia pulled back, wiping tears from her cheeks. So, you know now, she said softly, about your condition. Daniel nodded. Dr. Harris explained everything. And Dr. Montgomery. I can't believe you went through all this trouble for me, risking our marriage just to spare me the anxiety. She offered a shaky smile, eyes still moist. It was never a risk I wanted to take. But I couldn't bear watching you worry every day, knowing your heart was failing. I thought, if I could just fix it quietly, you could go on living your life without that fear hanging over you. Maybe it was foolish. He cupped her cheek, a surge of tenderness washing over him. It was brave and selfless. Then his voice broke. I'm the fool who assumed you were having an affair. Sophia exhaled slowly, a tear rolling down. I was terrified you'd think that, but I couldn't tell you everything without defeating the purpose. I swear, Daniel, all those meetings were about finding specialists and potential donors. The hotel was where Dr. Montgomery was staying, and I had to meet him and other experts who flew in for conferences. Sometimes they'd only have an hour to spare. I had to make it work. Daniel's heart twisted with guilt. I wish I'd trusted you more. But I want to fix this. If you'll let me, we can fight this together. She nodded, relief mingling with sadness. We have to act fast. Dr. Harris said the clock is ticking. We need to finalize the donor match and schedule the transplant. Otherwise, her voice trailed off, not wanting to voice the grim outcome. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. Then let's go. Right now. They left the lake behind and drove back to the hospital. Dr. Harris and Dr. Montgomery were relieved to see them united, noticing the determination in both their eyes. They hurriedly set the wheels in motion, updated tests, new lab work, and constant phone calls to donor agencies. Sophia stayed by Daniel's side every step of the way, filling out forms, calming him when fear crept in. He saw how exhausted she looked, and yet her spirit remained unwavering. In the days that followed, Daniel's condition seemed to worsen. Simple tasks like climbing stairs left him breathless, and he felt a persistent heaviness in his chest. Dr. Montgomery explained that they were close to securing a donor heart, but the final confirmation had yet to come through. Time was their enemy, a merciless countdown that loomed over every conversation. One evening, Daniel lay in a hospital bed, monitors beeping softly in the background. Sophia sat in a chair beside him, her hand wrapped around his. He mustered a half-smile. I'm sorry you have to see me like this, he murmured, voice weak. She shook her head. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. You saved me in your own way. You know, back when we met in college and I was lost, not sure if I was any good at design. You believed in me. I'm just returning the favor. He squeezed her hand, overcome with emotion. I love you, he whispered. Tears burned his eyes. I promise, if I make it through this, I'll spend every day proving it. A soft knock on the door interrupted them. Dr. Harris entered with a clipboard, face set in a tight smile. We got word from the donor registry. There's a potential match, he said gently. We need to confirm viability, but if all checks out, we might have a transplant ready within the next 24 hours. Relief crashed over them, mingling with a fresh wave of anxiety. Sophia nodded, tears brimming. "Thank you, doctor," she managed, holding Daniel's hand tighter. The next day crawled by in agonizing increments. Daniel underwent a barrage of tests to ensure his body could handle the surgery. Meanwhile, the donor heart was being prepared in a different hospital, set to be flown in if final screenings aligned. Each phone call made them jump, hearts pounding at the prospect of good or bad news. Finally, in the early evening, the team received word. The donor heart was approved and en route. Doctors bustled around Daniel, prepping him for surgery. Sophia stood beside the gurney, biting her lip, trying not to cry. Daniel caught her gaze, his eyes full of both fear and determination. "You're my reason to fight," he told her, voice trembling. "Don't forget that." She kissed his forehead, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'll be right here, waiting." They wheeled him through double doors, leaving Sophia in the waiting area, heart pounding. She buried her face in her hands, time passing in a blur of worry. Thoughts spiraled, memories of their wedding vows, their playful moments, and the day he stormed out. She prayed silently, clutching her phone, hoping for a miracle. Hours later, Dr. Montgomery emerged, mask pulled down, looking fatigued but relieved. "The surgery went as well as we could hope," he said quietly. "He's not out of the woods yet. The next 48 hours are critical, but I'm cautiously optimistic." Sophia wept with gratitude, thanking him over and over. She was allowed a brief visit to recovery room. Daniel lay there, pale, tubes connected to him, machines beeping steadily. But his new heart was beating in his chest. Leaning close, she brushed a tender kiss to his forehead. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, with tears of relief sliding down her face, she realized something profound. Their love had withstood the ultimate test, and no secret or misunderstanding could ever truly break them. The end. Enjoyed the story? We invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing more beautiful stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your effort. See you again.